Welcome back to another episode of Marketing, Management, and Money. This is one of our interview episodes. We actually really enjoy these because we get to meet a lot of interesting people who bring a lot to the table. In particular, today we are talking with Jason Falls. He is the author and creator of Winfluence. He is an influencer marketer, and this is something that we here on Marketing, Management, and Money probably don't delve into as much as we should. And so we decided to bring in kind of an outside expert to share some insight to all about influence marketing, how to really connect with influencers, speak their language, and grow your business. And so, with that, Jason, why don't you take just a second and give a high level overview? You know what you do and really influencer marketing. What is that all about?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on the show. I'm glad to be able to hopefully provide some insight and whatnot to everybody today. So what I do, I'm actually a digital strategist at an advertising agency called Cornet in Lexington, Kentucky. And but I have a background in PR and journalism. And back in the early to mid 2000s, I started working with clients who were asking a lot of questions about social media, social networks, blogging, and things like that. And so I was kind of one of the early, agency guys who was jumping in and saying, okay, here's how we can leverage these new communications channels for your business. So I've been kind of in and around the social media, digital marketing space for about 15 years or so now, working with clients and brands on all things digital and social. And influencers and influencer marketing, quite frankly, it shouldn't be smoke and mirrors magic to people. It's not new. We've put a new label on it, but it's definitely not new. I mean, I'm a PR guy by trade, and so influence marketing is what I've been doing my whole career. I've been reaching out to people who already have an established audience, people in the media, and trying to partner with them, build relationships with them, and pitch them ideas for their stories and their coverage that would, benefit my clients, myself, et cetera, whomever I'm working with.
Right.
And there's a give and a take. Some of the old school media influencers that I worked with needed me because I was a conduit to information from my clients that they wanted. And then sometimes I needed to get information out to people through them that they didn't necessarily consider news, but there was a give and a take there. And so that's how I've looked at influence marketing in terms of online influencers, Instagrammers and YouTubers and all that good stuff. Because it's really the same thing. These are new media outlets. They have established audiences. They have influence over these people. And I want to get in front of those people with a message. Maybe it's a brand. Maybe it's to promote myself or my book or my podcast or your podcast or whatever. And so I'm just trying to build relationships with these folks in order that we can benefit from one another. And that's, sort of ultimately what influencer marketing in a nutshell is.
Okay. So I really appreciate that. Let's take just a second and delve into a little bit. If people, as we get into this conversation, if people want to learn more about you, how do they connect with you? And I'd like to put this in early in the show because a lot of times people, they start going and they're just like, oh man, this is great content, and they want more, and they don't know how to reach out. So, how do people connect with you? What's your podcast? How do they get your book? Give us the quick on that.
Okay, so I'm Jason Falls everywhere. So I'm easy to find at Jason Falls on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, etc.
Okay.
JasonFalls.com is the website. If you want to get straight to the podcast, the front page of the website has a link to the Winfluence podcast, which is the companion podcast for the book. It also has a link to a podcast called Digging Deeper, which is a more broad marketing in general podcast I do with Cornet, the agency where I work.
Okay.
And there's a link there to the book as well. So JasonFalls.com is kind of your one-stop shop. It's got links to my social networks, and love to connect and love to answer questions and help folks. So please connect with me there.
Love it. Okay. Well, with that, let's start getting into this. Okay. And this is where I kind of want to kick it off. A lot of times when we're working with small businesses and we start talking about, these strategic partnerships and the importance it is of connecting these strategic partnerships, they don't even know where to begin. It's this whole idea of, it's like, well, what do I just find someone who has 100,000 followers, and then I shoot them a message and it gets buried in the
hope and pray that somehow by some miracle
that mine stands out.
Yeah.
And so they pretty quickly get disheartened, and they don't know where to go, and then they give up. Like that happens all too often, and it shouldn't happen. So where do you just get started? What's step one in this whole process?
I love the fact that you framed it that way, because the kind of the underlying theme of the book Winfluence, which the subtitle for everybody who wants to know is Reframing Influencer Marketing to Ignite Your Brand.
Mm-hmm.
And the reframing of influencer marketing is what the book is about, which is to say, you don't need someone with 100,000 followers on Instagram or some social network to participate in influence marketing. And I actually argue in the book that we got to stop calling it influencer marketing, because that focuses on the channel, the person. And we need to start calling it influence marketing, because what you're trying to do is influence people. And when you look at it through that lens, through that perspective, what I argue in the book, and this is for any business out there, small, medium, or large, what you need to do is identify people who are influential over your audience, the audience you're trying to reach. Now, let me put that in a different context for you than Instagram and YouTube. Let's say I am a local medical center, hospital, healthcare system, and I want to reach an audience of moms, because our children's hospital is where they really should take their kid for certain ailments and certain things. Because if they take them to another healthcare center or another clinic or whatnot, they're just going to route them back to ours because we have the subject matter expertise. So I'm trying to communicate a message to moms in a single community. My influencers aren't going to be on Instagram or on YouTube. They're going to be presidents of the local PTA organization. They're going to be popular dentists and doctors in town. They're going to be, the organizers of dance troops and soccer teams, right? Those are my influencers. And so when you are participating in influence marketing rather than influencer marketing, you get your head out of the social network realm, and you realize, as long as I can find people who are influential over this audience, and I can reach out to them and find a way to partner to give them contact information, to give them content, to give them opportunities to enhance what they do in exchange for maybe communicating my message or just letting me be there with them. Now, all of a sudden, you have permission to talk to that audience too.
Yeah, and I absolutely love that explanation of it. I've seen time and time again, as I'm sure you have, where people try to get in front of, quote unquote, their audience by approaching their audience from a completely foreign means, right? By something they think is going to be popular or appealing to their audience, like a Super Bowl commercial or whatever. And it in no way is targeted toward their audience. It's not something their audience is interested in. And then all that time and money and energy and effort just completely falls flat. Like we've seen businesses go out of business from trying to approach, their influence marketing from this avenue, and it just doesn't work. You have to, like you're saying, you have to look at your audience and what appeals to them, and who in that space are influencers over them.
That's true.
I love it.
The biggest mistake I think that businesses make when they're dealing with influencers, either online influencers or those who are influential offline. In the book, I kind of say, are you dealing with influencers or people of influence? And so people of influence is kind of the offline version of that, I guess, for lack of a better term. But when you're dealing with those, the biggest mistake businesses make is they just try to force it. They try to say, okay, here's a coupon code just for your audience. Well, that's okay. But what if you have something of value? I mean, every business out there has subject matter expertise in whatever it is they do, right? If you sell swimming pools, you got expertise on something that lots of other people don't have expertise on. So why don't you approach influencers who are, posting about all the fun they're having in their backyard cookouts and things like that, and talking about community events, and say, hey, how can we bring some knowledge about, putting in a swimming pool that will help your audience. Let's partner on how to do that, because if you are just delivering a message one way and not collaborating with that influencer or paying attention to their audience, it's just going to sound like an ad, and that's going to fall flat. If you're working with the influencer to find an interesting way to leverage their influence and their content to deliver your message to their audience, it's going to have a lot better lasting impact, because it's going to be more genuine and truthful through that particular person.
Oh, see, I love what you're talking about, because one of the challenges that I have all the time in working with small businesses is that marketing budget. And marketing can get so expensive so fast. And I'll see a couple variations. I'll see those businesses that spend too much money on their marketing because they don't really have the budget for it, but they're like, no, you spend money to make money. And I'm like, oh, okay, there are some thresholds here. But more often I actually see those that are underfunded coming in, and they're like, okay, what can I get? I want to do a PPC campaign, and I've got $100. Like, well, don't, but with what you're saying here, like, if you have other collateral that might not be monetary, so as a business, you don't have the marketing budget that you wish that you had access to, but you've got the expertise, you've got the intelligence, you've got the connections. And you can leverage that, because that's a currency. If you go out as a business and you start connecting with people that need your connections, then all of a sudden you're spending a currency that's not necessarily monetary, but still has a high value. And so I really appreciate the fact that you're kind of explaining that even in this this digital world where everyone thinks that everything has to go through social media, and I'm like, well, social media is a powerful channel, but so is a handshake and a conversation at at the library with someone you bump into. Like, you can still market many different ways, whatever is available to you.
Right. So let me give you a quick example for your small business folks out there.
Perfect.
Let's say you got a retail store. Doesn't matter what you sell, but let's say you've got a place where you want foot traffic. Why not? And let's use Pittsburgh as an example. So Pittsburgh is a city that I know a little bit about. My dad lived there when I was growing up, and I happen to know that they have a local blog, podcast sort of entity that is very community focused, right? So if I'm a retail location in Pittsburgh, and by the way, the name of this website and blog it's a Pittsburgh kind of thing. You got to understand it, but it's yajagoff.com, yajagoff.com.
Wow.
And it kind of is what you think it is, but that's kind of a Pittsburghese way of saying, hey, you don't be a punk. It's like, hey, don't be a jagoff, right? That's what that says.
I love it.
So John and Rachel at jagoff.com, they have this podcast, they have a blog, they do a lot of community relation stuff. If I'm a retail location in Pittsburgh, I'm going to reach out to them and say, hey, would you guys like to set up and do your podcast live from my show at some point? I would be more than happy to host you, and if you're a restaurant, we'll feed you and all that good stuff. We would be honored to have you. Now, in some cases with big radio stations and whatnot, that's a live remote. You got to pay for it, and it's a sponsorship and all that good stuff. But if it's a local podcast that's still trying to build an audience and get attention, they're going to be like, hell yeah, we'll come set up in your place.
Right.
What you're doing there is you are just providing a venue and being a good host and capitalizing on influence marketing, because you're getting in front of somebody else's audience and you're not having to pay a dime for it.
Right.
So try to think of those partnerships where you can just provide what you have, not necessarily money, just provide what you have. Maybe there's people out there who will exchange telling people in their audience about you just in exchange for product. Depending upon what your product is, that might work too. So don't think of it in terms of I got to write a check. Think of it in terms of what value can I provide and ask for some value in return.
Oh, I love it. I love it. That's great. So I kind of want to take advantage of the fact that we've got you on the show and we can pick your brain, because I know that people can pick up your book and they can read it and they can get a lot of this content from that. They can go to your website, they can listen to your podcast show. But one of the things that I'm going to ask you to do, if it's okay, is I kind of want to get into some of the stories. I mean, you mentioned that you've been doing this for over 15 years, and especially in the digital marketing realm. I mean, in some professions, 15 years, it's a respectable amount of time, but like in digital marketing, 15 years, I mean, that's an insane amount of time.
That's forever.
And so
that's the most polite way anyone's ever called me old, by the way.
I'll take it.
Kindness is one of our mantras around here.
But I wonder if you could jump in and share some of the stories, some of the experiences, and they can be, you know, the stories that make you laugh. They can be the stories that make you cry, that say, look, don't do this. But could we get personal a little bit here on the show and hear some of your experience?
Well, sure. I mean, golly, that's a big bucket, a big door to swing open. Try to share some experiences with. I think, you know, probably here's a really good, idea and story that I think some folks out there will gravitate to, because especially if you're in the professional services world, so you're an accountant or you're an attorney or you do, you know, or you're at an agency, you're a marketer, right?
Yeah, we get a lot of those.
The way that I became influential in the marketing space, I think, is a really good case study and example of how to do it. And I don't say that to pat myself on the back, but I was in a position. I had spent the first 15 years of my career basically as a PR guy in college athletics. So I was the guy who conducted the press conferences after the game with the coaches and the players, and wrote the game notes for the media and stuff like that. It's a very niche, you know, sort of thing. When I got out of that and I started working in a mainstream marketing, advertising, PR firm, one of the things that I was working on was I was trying to come up with really good ideas on using social media and blogs and whatnot for one of our clients. And I had some ideas because I had dabbled in blogging and whatnot personally. And so I was, you know, throwing out some ideas to a client, and my client said, look, here's what I want you to do. I want you to become known in the digital marketing, internet marketing space so that you can tell our case studies as we build them. So what I want you to do is start going to the conferences, start going to the networking events, start getting out there and being seen in the space, network with the people who are influential already in the space, because you're smart enough that once you start talking to them, you'll become one of them too. Mm-hmm. So I had this client who just saw something in me, I guess, and had a lot of faith in me to go do that. So basically I spent about a year going to a bunch of conferences and events, which you can do either on scale on a national scale and go to all the big conferences in your industry, or you can do it, in a very small market and just go to the Chamber of Commerce events and the Neighborhood Business Association events and stuff like that, and network with the people who are influential and make the decisions in those organizations and those events and whatnot. And what I did over time was I got myself in front of the influential people in social media, PR, and digital marketing. The first time I did it, I was at a conference in Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. Not a bad place to be at a conference.
Right.
And there was a guy named Chris Brogan, who at the time was like the biggest name in social media. He was the guru of businesses working in social. Uh-huh. And so I kind of pestered him for a couple of weeks prior to the conference to say, hey, let me take you to dinner. I've got some clients who are doing some cool things I want to tell you about. I just want to meet you, get to know you. Now, prior to this conference, I had commented on his blog. I had had conversations with him on Twitter. So he knew who I was because I was a fan follower, someone active in his community. We get to this conference, we go to dinner, and we have a fantastic evening out with a couple of other friends, get to know each other real well. In the middle of this evening, I've known this guy for 2 hours in person. I've known him for a few months online. I've known him for 2 hours in person. He says, hey, I've got some friends at the Mandalay Bay across the street. Let's walk over there and have a drink with them. I'm like, okay. So we go across the street. We walk into the bar. And if I had a top 10 list of the most influential people in digital marketing, 8 of them were standing right in front of me.
Wow.
And so in one night, I became connected to all these people. And it didn't take long for them to start reading my blog and follow me on social networks. Sure. And now all of a sudden I was sort of in the midst of it. That can happen with anyone at any level, in any business, in any market. It's really about networking with the people that you want to get in front of, people whose audiences maybe you want to get in front of, and, just contributing to the conversation, being a good friend, being a good partner, sharing ideas, telling stories. And that's a really good way for you to kind of build your own thought leadership and credibility in what you're doing.
Oh, yeah, that's great. That's great.
So if you're good at making friends, this is your realm.
Which that's one way of looking at it. But to all you introverts out there, this is the digital space. And we're in the middle of a pandemic. You don't have to leave your house to do this.
Yeah, right.
You can do this on social networks. You can do this on your computer. You don't even have to have a real picture for your avatar. I would advise it because people want to see a human being, but introverts can do this too.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So you've talked a lot about networking, and I've gone to networking events. I've done the speed networking, which I personally am not a huge fan of the speed networking. I don't know if the speed dating ever works. I've never tried that, but most of these networking things are not how I build my network. Most of the time, it's in more of an authentic situation, and that's me. But I kind of want to hear from you because you've mentioned networking several times now in this conversation, and what I'm hearing is that influence marketing and networking, they're partners here. You've got to
go hand in
put them
hand
together. Yeah. So give some advice for our listeners that are out there. I mean, you did talk about how the playing field has been leveled for the introvert, but still, let's get to kind of some of the nuts and bolts. I'm sitting here, I'm listening, and I'm thinking, okay, there's some good stuff here, but I try and network. I don't know what to say. What do you recommend?
Have a goal. Okay, so the guy that I mentioned, Chris Brogan,
yeah,
who I connected with, and then he introduced me to all these other people. Well, I had a goal of, and at the time, I'm certainly not ashamed to admit this, I was working with bourbon companies. So I happened to be representing Maker's Mark Bourbon at the time. The agency I worked for was their agency of record.
Mm-hmm.
So my goal with Chris was to make sure that he was ready and willing to talk about Maker's Mark and what we were doing when we had something useful for his community to learn from. So our plans were to build better social networking capabilities for the Maker's Mark Ambassadors program, which was a kind of a gold standard word of mouth marketing program. And I was going to launch the first blog in the spirits industry with Bill Samuels Jr., who was the CEO of the company.
Okay. Wow.
So nobody in the spirits world was doing social media at this point. So I knew we had those plans. My goal was to get in front of Chris and develop a relationship with him beyond just commenting on his blog posts. So we went out to dinner. I got to know him in person. I followed up with him and gave him a couple of, case studies from other clients that I knew about, connected him with some other friends, just tried to be a really good contributor to him and what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
When we launched the Maker's Mark blog, I reached out to him and said, hey, I've got something that I'm working on with a client that you might be interested in. He thought it was amazing, loved it, and told his audience about it. Several people in his audience called me and wanted me to come talk about it on their podcast or wanted me to write a guest post on their blogs about it, etc. And then fast forward another couple years, we invite Chris and some members of his team to Louisville, Kentucky to come and stay for a couple days, speak at an event that my agency was involved with, and take him down to the distillery for Maker's Mark and put him on a tour. To this day, probably once or twice a month, he talks about going to Maker's Mark in Laredo, Kentucky, and the experience he had there. And so that's the kind of, have a goal and understand, I want to get this brand in front of that person so that they just believe in it and they love it and they're passionate about it. And you do that by just being a good friend, just connecting with them and having a constant flow of communication. Doesn't always have to be about Maker's Mark.
Sure.
And it normally isn't, quite frankly. But when there's an opportunity then to say, hey, let me show you something, they're going to pay attention.
Well, and I love how natural that progression is, right? It's not anything that's forced. It's not you're not sitting down to write out a contract and say, hey, I've got 5 million followers and you're going to provide me with X in order to, there isn't any of that. It's just this relationship building. What can I do for you? I have this goal, and letting it play out like it naturally should, right?
And here's the trick, because I know a lot of people are out there thinking, yes, but what if I need to move the needle fast? What if I
Yeah.
need to drive
Right.
revenue this month, right? It's not either or, it's both. You want to find these influential people to build relationships with over time, so that 2 or 3 years from now, all you have to do is pick up the phone, call, and they're going to help you.
Mm.
Okay. But in the short term, you can actually start out by reaching out to them and saying, hey, I have a new product, or we're having a grand opening, or we're having an event, or we're doing something, and I need help getting the word out about it. What can I provide to you that would make it relevant for you to collaborate with me to tell your audience about this thing? And then beyond that, how can we work together over time so that you get really good stuff and really good value from me? And, when I have something that your audience might be interested in, then I can, bring that to you. If you go at it with what's in it for them on the front end, you'll find that a lot more people will be responsive to you than if you reach out to them and say, hey, can I give you something to tell your audience about? Because that's not necessarily what's in it for them. That's what's in it for you.
Right.
So flip it and say, how can I be helpful to you in the long term? And oh, by the way, in the meantime, I'm really trying to do something in the short term. Maybe that is a transactional relationship. Maybe it's I pay you for a post, or, we do something much more contractual and formal now, but keep nurturing that relationship, because eventually the people that are going to gravitate to you and you want to gravitate to you are going to, because they like what you do, they like who you are, and they like the product that you provide.
Yeah. Now, I'm glad that you brought something up that really is important when you get into this influence marketing space. And you said, go ahead and pay them for a post. We've talked organically for the bulk of this interview. And what if, should someone who is trying to build that up, should they start buying that influence? And I'm talking about the small business, because it's a different game. When you start talking corporate America, we all know that Coca-Cola and Nike and Adidas are spending, hundreds of millions, if not billions, on purchasing, influence. But I'm talking about the small business. What is your take on, should they go out and purchase? Is it a combination? Do they need a little bit of paid, a little bit of organic? What has your experience said about going down that road?
I think it's whatever works. Whatever you need to do to break that ice, to start that relationship, to get the ball moving on what you're trying to accomplish. For most small businesses, there's a lot of influencers out there that, have a big head and think that they're not going to do anything for less than $5,000 or whatever. And those are fewer and farther between than you think. Mm-hmm. Most people you approach as a small business and say, hey, I'd like to try to find a way to collaborate. I'm a small business. This is what I do. They're going to know you don't have $1 million marketing budget. They're going to know that you can't just be throwing out cash. But if you approach them by saying, here's what I do bring to the table. I can provide you with product. I can provide you with travel. I can provide you with expertise and knowledge. I can provide all of the different things that you bring to the table that are more intrinsic than extrinsic. If you bring that and say, here's what's in it for you in this relationship, I can help you become smarter about X, and therefore you become the thought leader to your audience about that topic. Now, all of a sudden, they start to see value in the relationship, and they're not worried so much about how much you're paying them. Some of them are going to say, look, this is how I make my money. I can't pay a mortgage with, a coupon, and I can't feed my kids with, best wishes and a pat on the back. I need you to pay me. And in that case, you have a decision to make. Is their audience the right audience? Is it big enough? And will this influencer translate what it is you want them to translate to that audience in such a way that it will motivate them to go purchase? If the net is that you get an ROI over, 250%, then absolutely pay that influencer. Mm-hmm. If you don't feel like it's going to work that way, or you want them to kind of prove their worth first, then just negotiate with them and try to figure out how you can do something to understand what kind of impact they can have on their audience on your behalf before you get too deep into it. The biggest fails that you see in influence marketing are brands and businesses that go to an influencer and just blindly say, we want our content or our product in front of your 50,000 followers. Here's a check. Please say these things. and they don't realize that that influencer is an influencer and they have an audience, but they don't have influence. They can't make them do something. And so that's where you see a lot of people getting frustrated with influencer marketing, because they don't work with influencers that they know can motivate their audience to do something.
Yeah, we had an experience where, and this was someone that reached out to us, and they had connected with a celebrity, and they were putting on a show, and they wanted us to be part of their show. And as we were going through, we entertained the proposal, and we were kind of looking at it, but as we kind of went through this, I'm like, yeah, the celebrity, it was someone that I knew, and since I don't really follow those circles, I'm like, well, it's got to have some, carry some weight, because I'm not, I'm not kind of that Encore tabloids, type person, and so, but at the end of the day, the numbers just didn't add up. The cost and the benefit, and so that's one thing that I've always looked at is, okay, what is the exchange, and what would the break even have to be? Because sometimes, if you are spending that kind of money, what do you want from them? What's the ongoing? Because if it's a one and done, and I've seen that happen a lot too. Businesses, they put a lot of money into something, they get the shout out, but then there's no follow up, and it's like, well, okay, well,
right.
You're done.
Well, and you also have to go back to your goals too, right? So if I want to move 50,000 units of a product in 48 hours, I'm taking out a Super Bowl commercial, because that's probably going to work,
right?
Especially if the product is low cost. In using influence marketing, if I need to move a lot of units fast, I'm going to invest a lot of money in a big celebrity influencer. Like if I sell lipstick or perfume, I'm getting a Kardashian and I'm getting a Jenner, because they've got umpteen million followers, and if they say go buy this lipstick, a couple 100,000 people are going to go buy that lipstick. It just happens. That's why they are getting paid a lot of money for their influencer marketing stuff, because they work. Right? They have enough people that a small percentage of the people, even a small percentage of 15 million followers, is a lot of people. Right?
It's a lot of purchases.
And so if you can get 2% of 15 million people to go buy your product tomorrow because you bought a Instagram post for $100,000, if the math works out and the product produces more than $100,000 in revenue, you win. All right. The problem is that most people go to influencers of that size with the goal of awareness, not transactions. And so they say, I'm going to pay 50 grand for one post from this big celebrity, and I hope that I sell, 25,000 units of whatever it is I'm selling.
Yeah.
But the influencer's post is them holding the product saying, this is really cool.
Right.
It's not click this button to buy, right? So you have to think about the goal of what you're doing. If your goal is to move product, then you need shoppable images. You need calls to action. You need links to click through so people can purchase it. You need to hope that the purchase price isn't very high, because the larger the purchase price, the longer the buying cycle, the more consideration the customer has to have. One post isn't going to do it, right? If you're going at them with awareness, then you say, okay, should I spend $50,000 with this one big celebrity for one post one time that's going to get a bunch of people aware of me for a few seconds? Or should I take that $50,000 and spread it out over 50 influencers who have 10,000 followers and do it over the course of 3 or 4 months, so that I have a constant flow of influential people talking about me to this audience? Now all of a sudden you're creating awareness. So there's just smarter ways to use the money depending upon your goal.
Yeah. Well, and I love how you took the approach of understanding what your goal is. And you kind of alluded to, you can't just make the assumption that because awareness happens, that sales will follow. I think exactly. That's a really big mistake that we see a lot among entrepreneurs and small business owners, is that they think they have this assumption that, well, if they see it, then somebody's going to buy it. Well,
hey, BMW does a great job of creating awareness, but do you guys drive a BMW? I don't drive a BMW.
I don't drive a BMW.
Right. I mean, but there's a lot of that.
They know They know if they invest in that awareness over time, enough people are going to convert and aspire to have a BMW and buy it in order for them to make their money. BMW is never going to pay one celebrity, Jay-Z or Beyonce or any of the Kardashians. They're never going to pay one celebrity a one-time thing to try to sell cars.
Yeah,
they're going to invest in someone over time to create a story and an atmosphere and an aspiration around their car, so that it over time convinces people that that's in their consideration set.
Yeah. So, okay. And oh my gosh, there's so much that we could cover, and I'm thoroughly enjoying this, but we do have some time restraints that we're going to do. So I'm going to throw out one last thought that I want you to touch on here. And that is, I want to look at this from the flip side. So we've talked entirely about small businesses reaching out to influencers. One of the things that I've noticed in the businesses that I've worked with is that some of these businesses are much stronger influencers than they realize, and that's part of their business. Like they are actually the influencer, and I've seen some that do a great job of leveraging that, diversifying their revenue streams, because now they're making revenue off of influencing. But I've seen others that just walk around almost blind to the fact that, when they say something, they have a couple dozen people that automatically shift behavior. And it's not, like we've been talking about, some of these big ones that, the Kardashians are going to have a couple 100,000 people react. I'm like, sure, but, if you're still able to influence 100 people, 1,000 people, that's a lot of influence. And so would you talk on, if you are an influencer, what you can do, how you can incorporate that? Because everyone thinks that to be an influencer, you have to set out to be like, oh, I'm not an influencer because I don't have a YouTube channel. It's like,
I'm not on Instagram.
No, you're absolutely right. There are lots of businesses, and probably more frequently than individual businesses, there's individual people at those businesses, kind of the face and the voice. Like maybe the local bank doesn't have a big social following or a bunch of impact or influence based on their online content, but the VP for sales or marketing or the CEO of that bank is known in town. People know this person. They have access to money. They are a player in the financial world in that community. I see a lot of executives at businesses, a lot of business owners who think, well, I need to leverage influencer marketing. But if they really just kind of turned on these channels and shared their knowledge and their expertise with people, they would see a good number of people would flock to them just to understand more about whatever it is. If I'm a local attorney or if I'm a local accountant, I'm posting some financial tips on Instagram as a little image with a little text over photo, little hey here's tax tip number 1, and I'm just going to keep doing that because my business is now going to become influential for people that are looking for advice on that. And how many people are looking for advice on that? A lot.
Everybody,
right?
yeah.
Everybody.
Especially in April.
Exactly. So I actually interviewed for my podcast that it just actually published today, the day we're recording this. I interviewed a young lady by the name of Jamie Lieberman, who's an attorney in New York City. There's lots of attorneys in New York City. She distinguishes herself by basically publishing a blog. She has a podcast and whatnot, where she tells people who are individual content creators, whether it's a comedian or a musician or an online influencer, here are the things that you need to watch out for from a legal perspective. Here's how to approach contracts. Here's how to approach sponsorships. Here's how to approach FTC disclosure, right? She puts all this free advice out there because she knows when one of them gets in trouble, who they're going to call. Right. They're going to call the lawyer that they're used to getting free advice from. Right. So put yourself in the position of leveraging what you know and what you're good at to build an audience for yourself. And then you don't necessarily have to rely on other influencers down the road. And I would also add to that, look at your vendor partners, because sometimes your vendor partners have nice online channels and talk to the same audience. So you can use them as an influencer, but you can also build content for yourself and tap into them for their expertise. And now all of a sudden you don't have to come up with the content. You're just asking them questions, but you're building influence for your own business.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, Jason, I feel like this could go on and on. I've loved it.
I love talking about it.
Yeah, this is a really cool topic for me. It's definitely something that I think is not understood as well as it should be and needs to be, especially among small businesses. So we thank you so much for your time. We look forward to having further conversations with you in the future and being better at influencing our networks.
You're very welcome. I'm honored to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, take care. We'll catch you next time. Take control of your business today. Go to tabletwise.com and search marketing management and money for the clarity you've always wanted. Be sure to stay tuned for new episodes on the first and third Wednesdays of every month, and make sure to subscribe to be notified when we release bonus content such as interviews and short discussions.